It was late morning, around 11:00. Though the sun made it feel closer to 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the coastal air carried salt and heat, rolling in off the Pacific and settling across the small airfield. Families had spread out blankets. Children clutched plastic flags, and vendors barked about hot dogs and souvenirs. The annual airshow was always a big deal in this part of California. The kind of event that gave small towns a taste of something larger. It was meant to dazzle, to show power, and to remind people of the pride they held for the men and women who flew into the sky. Among the crowd stood Emily Carson. She was 42, dressed in a faded gray hoodie that had lost its shape, and jeans that bore the marks of too many washes. Her sneakers were scuffed, the kind that said comfort mattered more than fashion. Her dark hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, strands slipping free as the sea breeze pushed against her face. She blended in like a shadow, someone you would pass on a sidewalk without a second thought. She chose her spot near the edge of the field, away from the chatter and the picnic coolers. From there, she could see the runway, the hangars lined up in military order, and the blue sky above where the jets would carve their patterns. She carried nothing with her except an old keychain hidden in her pocket, a small metal shape of an A-10 Thunderbolt, dulled at the edges but still intact, her thumb pressed against it absent-mindedly. The way someone might hold on to a worry stone, vendors had set up long rows of stands. One man, his neck already pink from the sun, noticed Emily standing alone. He waved a bright t-shirt at her, his voice booming over the hum of the crowd. "Hey lady, you lost? Or what? This isn't a yoga retreat." The people near him chuckled, some glancing at her, as though expecting her to retreat in embarrassment. Emily did not answer. She shifted her weight, eyes still on the sky, her fingers pressing the keychain deeper into her palm. The vendor smirked and turned back to his customers, satisfied with his performance. A little girl stood nearby with her father, holding a model jet she had begged him to buy. She tugged at his sleeve and pointed toward Emily. "Daddy, why is she here by herself? She doesn't even look like she likes airplanes." The man, tall and broad in a polo shirt, shrugged without care. "Probably lost. Kiddo, just ignore her." The girl nodded and went back to her toy. Satisfied, Emily heard every word. She closed her eyes for a moment, let the air move through her lungs, then opened them again and looked back at the empty sky. Groups of teenagers wandered past, their sunglasses bright, their laughter sharp. One of them tilted his head toward her. "Bet she doesn't even know what an F-22 is." Another snorted, saying she was probably here for the food trucks. Their friends laughed, the sound loud enough for her to catch. She did not react, her jaw set quietly, her shoulders squared. And still her gaze never left the runway. The announcer's voice came through the loudspeakers, clear and cheerful, telling the crowd that at 1230, 12:30, the Raptors would take to the sky. Families clapped, children shouted in excitement, and phones lifted to capture every moment. Emily's lips tightened just slightly. She had been here before, year after year, always on the edge of the crowd, always silent. None of them knew she had once sat in a cockpit, that she had felt the weight of G-forces pressing against her chest, that she had flown at treetop level in a combat zone, with her heart hammering in her throat. To them, she was only a woman in worn clothes standing too close to the barrier. An older couple passed her, the woman wearing a wide straw hat, the man carrying a camera around his neck. They gave her a glance, their eyes lingering a moment too long, then whispered to each other as they walked on. Emily did not need to hear the words. She had grown used to that look. The jets were late, held back on the ground for reasons no one bothered to explain. The crowd filled the gap with chatter, with music from radios, with the smells of grilled food. Emily stood still, the sun catching in her hair, her fingers never leaving the small piece of metal in her pocket. That keychain was the only part of her past she allowed herself to keep. It reminded her of a time when her name carried weight, when younger pilots looked to her for guidance, when commanders trusted her judgment without hesitation. Now she was simply Emily, the quiet woman who taught yoga in town, who bought groceries without drawing notice, who walked the beach at dawn when no one else was around. She had chosen that life, or at least convinced herself that she had, but standing there, surrounded by laughter and dismissal, she felt the tension build inside her chest. It was not anger. Not really. It was something deeper. A sharp edge of memory that refused to be dulled by time. The crowd around her buzzed with anticipation. A group nearby unfolded chairs, passing out bottled water, chatting about the show. Someone glanced at Emily again, their eyes flicking over her hoodie and sneakers. Then back to their friends with a smirk. She caught the glance but let it pass. To fight it would mean drawing attention, and that was the one thing she had learned to avoid. She stood with her shoulders relaxed, her breathing steady, her gaze fixed above. To anyone else, she was invisible. To herself, she was still a pilot, even if no one around her could see it. The keychain pressed against her palm, solid and cold, anchoring her to a past she no longer spoke of. The sky would soon fill with sound and speed, and she would watch like she always did, quiet and unseen. But deep down, she knew that silence never lasted forever. The announcer's voice was cheerful as the F-22 rolled down the runway at exactly 1230, 12:30. The Raptor lifted with a roar, climbing fast. Its gray frame glinting under the California sun, the crowd erupted with applause. Children jumping to point at the jet slicing into the sky. Phones rose high to capture it as the pilot pulled into a vertical climb, banking into a steep roll. It was the kind of maneuver that drew gasps even when everything went right. But this time, something went wrong. A sharp crack split the sound, not like thunder but like metal being pushed too far. The jet wavered, its right engine coughing a black trail of smoke that cut across the clear sky. The sleek frame tilted, dipping hard toward the horizon. People in the crowd screamed, some covering their mouths, others clutching their children. The announcer's voice faltered, then broke into static. As the control tower seized the channel, the radio carried the young pilot's strained words, "Mayday, Mayday. Raptor, 3, 4. Right engine failure. Loss of hydraulic pressure." The sound of heavy breathing filled the silence between each clipped report. First Lieutenant Matt Reeve was barely 2 years out of training. A name the crowd didn't know, but a life that hung by threads of wiring and failing controls. His yet shuddered, wobbling like a wounded bird. On the ground, officers poured out of the command post, their voices sharp and urgent. A colonel shouted into his radio, demanding updates. Technicians scanned the sky, barking numbers about altitude and velocity. The announcer, shaken, tried to steady his voice, telling the crowd to stay calm. Though no one was listening, a mother pulled her son close. A man in a baseball cap muttered that it was going to crash. The panic spread in waves. The Raptor spiraled lower, trailing smoke that darkened against the sun. Emergency vehicles rolled out from the far end of the field, their sirens wailing, medics already bracing for the worst. A staff sergeant near the barrier turned to his superior. "Sir, if he loses the second engine, he's gone." The officer didn't answer, his jaw locked, his eyes on the sky. A call came over the loudspeaker from inside the tower, the commander's voice booming above the chaos. "Is there anyone here qualified on Raptor operations? We need assistance immediately." The words seemed impossible, hanging in the hot air. The F-22 was the most advanced fighter in the world, and the idea that no one present could save the pilot left the crowd stunned into silence. Heads turned, scanning for someone, anyone, to step forward. No one moved. Emily Carson stood still at the edge of the field. Her hoodie clung to her shoulders, the breeze carrying the smoke down toward the crowd. She had not flinched when the jet cracked, had not looked away. When the pilot's voice broke across the radio, her hand had gone straight to her pocket, fingers gripping the worn A-10 keychain until the edges pressed hard into her skin. Around here, people scrambled to leave their seats. A young man shouted that the jet was going down. Another cursed. Pulling out his phone to film, Emily's breathing slowed instead of quickened. Her gaze locked on the spiraling aircraft. She knew the tilt of those wings, the fight against drag, the desperate attempts of a pilot running through emergency checklists. She knew it because she had lived it. She took one step forward, then another, moving toward the restricted barrier. At first, no one noticed her. The chaos drowned her out. She walked with quiet certainty, each footfall steady on the gravel. The sirens wailed. The radios barked. The crowd screamed. But Emily's eyes never wavered from the falling jet. She carried no sign, no badge, nothing to tell them who she was. Yet inside her, something old had stirred, something she had buried years ago, but never truly lost. The officers' voices rose louder, demanding solutions that never came. The Raptor spun again, dropping lower, its shadow dragging over the airfield. Emily reached the barrier, her hand resting on the cool metal rail. No one had asked her to come forward. No one believed she could help. But her body had already decided. Emily moved past the barrier, her steps steady against the cracked asphalt. The shouts from the crowd faded as she walked toward the command post, its glass windows glowing with red light from the alarm panels inside. No one stopped her at first. The chaos pulled every guard and staff member in different directions, their eyes fixed on the failing jet still circling overhead. She slipped through the open door, carrying herself with a calm that did not match the storm around her. Inside, the room was filled with clipped voices and frantic motion. Radios crackled with altitude reports. Screens flashed warnings in bold letters. Officers barked updates, their shoulders tense. A technician with sweat running down his neck shouted numbers about fuel pressure, his voice breaking mid-sentence. A major turned at the sound of the door, his face tight with anger at the intrusion. He saw Emily and shook his head, his tone sharp. "Get her out of here. We don't need civilians adding to this mess." His words cut through the room, snapping a few heads toward her. The uniform on his shoulders carried weight, and his dismissal brought nods from younger officers. To them, she was only a middle-aged woman in a hoodie, someone who belonged outside with the crowd, not in the heart of the operation. Emily did not answer. She reached into her pocket with deliberate movement, pulling out a small leather case that had grown soft with age. She flipped it open on the table, the fluorescent light catching the worn edges of her military ID. The photo was younger, but still her. The name printed clear: Carson. Emily R. Rank Lieutenant Colonel, United States Air Force. Below it, the line most people never saw. Outside of certain records: graduate, Naval Fighter Weapons School, red flag, combat veteran. The room froze. The chatter of radios seemed to fade as eyes locked on the card. A technician whispered under his breath, almost reverent, "Top Gun." Another officer, younger, muttered about Kandahar, remembering old reports about a pilot who had flown both F-16 seconds and a -10 seconds on missions that left marks in training manuals. The silence carried weight heavier than the alarms still flashing on the screens. The major's lip curled. 12 years away from the stick. "You can't expect us to believe you're ready to handle a Raptor." His tone carried arrogance, but the sharpness of his words was edged with doubt. Now, he knew the name, knew it had lived in stories told by older instructors. Still, he could not let go of the image in front of him. A a woman in plain clothes who looked nothing like the legend he had heard. Emily lifted her gaze to him, her expression calm but unyielding. Her voice came low, steady, the same voice that had once carried across a radio in combat. "I haven't forgotten how to fly. I just haven't needed to." The line landed with the weight of truth, not bravado. It was not a boast. It was a reminder that skill earned through years of training and missions did not simply vanish. A captain near the radar screen shifted uncomfortably. Glancing from her to the data climbing down on the monitor, he cleared his throat. "Hesitant. Sir. With respect. No one else here has touched a Raptor's controls. We're out of options." The words hung heavy, drawing reluctant nods from those who had mocked only minutes earlier. The major looked away for a moment, his jaw tightening. Emily closed the leather case and slid it back into her pocket. She did not press the point further. Her calm presence spoke louder than arguments ever could. Outside, the roar of the crippled jet reminded them all that time was running out. She stepped closer to the desk, her hand resting lightly on the edge. Waiting. No one moved to block her this time. The transformation was not sudden, but it was absolute. In less than a minute, Emily Carson had shifted from invisible civilian to the only person in the room with the authority of lived experience. The officers looked at her differently now. Not with open admiration yet, but with something new. They looked at her with the fragile beginnings of belief. The hangar doors yawned open, the concrete floor echoing with the shuffle of boots and the distant wail of sirens. A backup F-22 sat ready on the line, its gray skin gleaming under the harsh lights. Technicians swarmed around it, their voices clipped and urgent. Some looked up as Emily entered, their faces twisted with disbelief. She was still in her hoodie, still carrying the air of someone who should have been watching from the crowd, not walking straight toward a Raptor. A young airman with grease on his hands shook his head, muttering to the man beside him, "She hasn't touched 5th-gen avionics in her life. This isn't an F-16. His friends smirked, adding that fly-by-wire would eat her alive. Their words floated through the air, but Emily didn't pause. She approached the ladder already in place, her steps sure, her face calm. She climbed with steady hands and lowered herself into the seat as if she had never left it. The cockpit wrapped around her like an old memory. Different screens and sharper displays, but the heart of it the same. She pulled the harness across her chest and clicked it into place, fingers moving with muscle memory that had never faded. A tech nearby scoffed quietly, expecting hesitation, but her hands moved without pause. She began the startup sequence with the rhythm of someone who had done it thousands of times. Battery on, avionics boot, oxygen flow check. Her voice was quiet but firm. Each step confirmed with precision. She flipped switches, scanned readings, adjusted trim. To the crew around her, it felt less like watching someone relearn and more like watching a clock tick. Every motion exact. The cockpit displays flared to life, green symbols filling the HUD. She adjusted the seat, checked the flight controls, and called out over the radio. "Control. Valkyrie Actual. Systems online." The room seemed to still. The call sign had weight. Some of the older crew looked up at each other, recognition flickering. Valkyrie. They had heard the name years back, tied to sorties over Kandahar and long nights of combat air support in an A-10. A captain near the console leaned toward his colleague, voice low. "That's her. She was the one they said never missed." His colleague swallowed, his earlier smirk gone. His eyes fixed on the cockpit. The shift was small, but it spread, disbelief giving way to silence as Emily's calm filled the space. The major who had mocked her earlier stood near the edge of the hangar, his jaw tight. He wanted to object, to remind them all that 12 years on the ground was too long, but the precision of her movements left him nothing to point at. She moved through the checklist with the steady control of a professional, not a relic. Emily tested the radio again. Her tone clipped, and professional. Valkyrie, actual ready to taxi on your order. The tower hesitated, then answered with a call back. Their voice formal now. Copy Valkyrie actual. Stand by for clearance. The words settled over the hangar like a verdict. She wasn't a civilian here. She was a pilot. Technicians who had doubted her fell quiet, their eyes tracking her hands as she adjusted the throttle and checked control surfaces. Her fingers tapped the stick lightly, confirming response. Smooth and sharp, she looked through the canopy toward the sky. The smoke trail of the failing jet still etched against the blue. Her jaw tightened, but her breathing stayed even. For a moment the hangar held no noise except the faint hum of electronics and the muted cough of engines spinning to life. The technicians no longer muttered. The officers no longer argued. The only sound that mattered was Emily's calm confirmation as she closed out the final items. She had been invisible an hour ago. Now she was the only one anyone could see. The engines roared as Emily pushed the throttle forward. The backup F-22 leaping down the runway. The G-force pressed against her chest, but her grip on the stick stayed steady. She rotated clean at just over 150 knots. Nose, lifting into the hot California sky. The crowd below fell into silence, the sound of the jet drowning out everything else. She raised the landing gear and banked hard, climbing toward the crippled aircraft that still traced a black scar across the horizon. Lieutenant Matt Reeves' voice cracked over the radio, tight with fear. Valkyrie actual. I can't keep her steady. I'm losing it. His breathing came fast, clipped between words. The sound of a pilot on the edge. Emily's reply was calm, almost measured. Copy. Raptor 3-4. You're not alone. Listen and stay with me. The steadiness of her tone cut through his panic, pulling him back from the spiral. She closed the gap, her HUD locking onto the failing jet as she came in from below and to the left. The smoke made it easy to track, but the movements were erratic. She adjusted trim, rolling out smooth until her jet flew wing to wing with his so close she could see the tremor of his helmet inside the canopy. Her voice came again. Firm. Stabilize pitch. Pull 2 degrees up. Hold your rudder steady. Reeves' jet wobbled, the nose dipping before catching. He answered, voice unsteady but clearer. Trying. Ma'am. Hydraulics gone right side. Emily knew the systems by heart. Override yaw dampers. Shift to manual. Open emergency ram air. It will feel heavy but she'll hold. He hesitated. Then followed. The Raptor shuddered, but steadied. The smoke thinning slightly as airflow forced through. For the first time in minutes, his jet stopped falling away. Down below, the control tower called vectors, their voices tense. Valkyrie actual. You are cleared to guide him in. Emily acknowledged with the clipped tone of someone who had done this before. Copy tower. We're bringing him home. She glanced through the canopy at the younger pilot, his head snapping toward her jet, his breathing still ragged. She nodded once, though he might not see it. They flew in tight formation, the 2 Raptors like shadows against the afternoon light. Emily fed him instructions piece by piece. Ease throttle to 80%. Hold altitude at 2,000. Keep nose 3 degrees high. Each command was short, exact, giving him only what he needed. He obeyed, sometimes jerking too hard, sometimes overcompensating. But she corrected him with the calm of a teacher who refused to let her student fail. The runway stretched below. Fire trucks and ambulances already in position. The crowd pressed against the barriers, eyes fixed on the 2 jets descending together. A medic whispered that they were both about to crash. A ground officer clenched his headset with white knuckles. No one could look away. Emily's voice carried steady in the young pilot's ears. Stay with me. Reeve. Gear down. 3 green. Hold glide slope. You'll see the PAPI lights. 2 red. 2 white. Keep it that way. His voice shook. Roger. Gear down. 3 green. He reported it like a checklist item, his confidence slowly returning. They came in side by side, the crippled jet wobbling but holding alignment. Emily took the lead, setting her Raptor on the numbers with perfect control. Her rear wheels touched first, then the nose wheel, smoke curling from the tires. A breath later, Reeves' jet slammed down, the landing rough but solid. Both aircraft thundered down the runway, speed bleeding off as parachutes deployed. The field erupted in cheers, a roar of disbelief and relief that washed over everything. Fire crews sprinted forward, foam cannon ready. But both jets rolled to a stop upright. Inside her cockpit, Emily exhaled slowly, her hands loosening from the stick. She had not wavered once. Beside her, Lieutenant Reeves' voice came fine but steady. Valkyrie Actual. Thank you. Emily closed her eyes for a brief moment, then answered with calm finality. You did it. Lieutenant, I was just your shadow. The roar of the crowd hit like a wave when the 2 Raptors slowed to a stop, the sound raw and unrestrained. People shouted and clapped, waving flags, some crying from relief. It felt like the stadium of a championship game, except lives had just been pulled back from the edge. Fire trucks rolled closer. Medics sprinted. Reporters jostled for position. All of them wanted to see the face behind the jet that had landed steady as stone. Emily released her harness and pulled off her helmet, her dark hair sticking to her forehead. She climbed down the ladder with slow, careful steps. When her boots touched the asphalt, the cheers shifted. The noise softened, like someone had turned a dial. A ripple spreading through the crowd. They had expected a decorated figure in a pressed uniform, not a woman in a faded hoodie. Her sneakers scuffed and her face pale from strain. The applause thinned into silence. She took a few steps and her knees buckled, her body drained by adrenaline that had carried her too far. Medics rushed forward, their stretchers ready. She waved them off weakly, muttering that she was fine. But the ground tilted beneath her. Darkness swept over her as they lifted her gently, their voices fading into a blur. The last thing she felt was the keychain pressing cold in her palm. When she woke, light streamed through blinds in the base infirmary. A clock on the wall read 1615, 4:15 in the afternoon. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic, a fan humming overhead. She sat up slowly, her muscles aching as though she had just run miles under heavy gear. Beside her bed, on a plain metal table, rested the keychain of the A-10. The edges catching the light, she reached for it, curling her fingers around the metal like a lifeline. The door opened, and the base commander stepped inside. He was tall, his hair streaked with gray, his uniform pressed even in the chaos of the day. He looked at her not with doubt but with respect that ran deep. Behind him, the hallway was crowded with men and women in uniform, their faces solemn, their postures rigid. Word had spread, and they had gathered not for spectacle but for recognition. The commander's voice was quiet but carried weight. Lieutenant Colonel Carson, you saved that pilot's life. You saved that jet. His eyes met hers. Steady. You're still one of us. The words struck harder than applause. For 12 years she had lived in silence, convinced her name no longer belonged anywhere near a flight line. Now, spoken in the flat tone of military truth, it returned. A young Marine stepped forward from the line, barely out of training, his shoulders square but his hands trembling. Oars earlier. He had mocked her reflexes as fossilized. Sure, she had nothing left. Now his eyes were lowered as he spoke, his voice rough. Ma'am, I was wrong. I'm sorry. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of humility, a soldier admitting his mistake before the one who had proven him wrong. Emily looked at him, her expression soft but firm. She gave a single nod, not out of cruelty, but out of understanding. Forgiveness did not need words. The Marine stepped back into line, his salute crisp despite the flush on his cheeks. The rest of the formation snapped to attention. Hands rose in perfect unison. A sea of salutes, sharp and unwavering. Emily stood slowly, her legs unsteady, but her back straight. She walked to the doorway and looked at them. Rows of uniforms and faces, pilots and ground crew, officers and enlisted alike. Hours ago, they had doubted her, mocked her, brushed her aside. Now they stood for her, not because of legend, but because of what they had seen with their own eyes. She did not smile, did not wave. She only stood still, the silence carrying more power than any speech. The air hung heavy with respect, the kind that could not be demanded, only earned somewhere near the back. An older pilot she recognized, from years before, tipped his cap, his eyes proud. The rest stayed silent, their hands pressed to brows, waiting until she passed. The commander stepped aside as she moved forward. His own salute held steady. The hallway echoed with the sound of her sneakers against the floor. She slipped the keychain back into her pocket, the small metal jet swinging against her fingers. Outside, the coastal air hit her face. Cooler now, as the sun drifted lower, the runway stretched empty, the crowd gone. The fire trucks parked in neat rows. In the distance, another jet took off, its roar fading into the sky. She paused, lifting her eyes upward, watching the contrail cut across the horizon. For 12 years, she had hidden, carrying the weight of silence. She had been dismissed, underestimated, and forgotten. But the sky had not forgotten. It remembered every maneuver, every hour, every risk. Today, so did they. Emily took a slow breath and started walking, each step deliberate, steady. She did not look back. She didn't need to. The salute, the silence, and the sky itself had already said everything.